And we are back for Overanalyzing House of the Dragon, the, according to the source material, story of how Rhaenyra's Blacks faced off against Aegon's Greens. Now, it's been a while since the last episode, and since then House of the Dragon Season 1 was released. And so we must be careful going forward, as on an unconscious level, the events of the show are going to influence interpretation of the text. So let us be extra vigilant in focusing on what the text actually says, as it is a very, very different story from the show, despite me using show visuals to help things along. Where we left things off, there of course had been massive evidence of Maester bias in the telling of the tale. The characters who will become the Blacks are slandered and continuously screwed over, while the Greens are painted in a kinder light. We saw Rhaenys getting passed over twice for the throne after her father was mysteriously killed. Viserys is made king, but his brother Daemon is almost certainly framed in the Heir for a Day incident, and Rhaenyra is made heir. Daemon then goes off to fight in the rather illogical war in the Stepstones, perhaps a scheme for Corlys to befriend Daemon, though as told by Gildain, it's a power play of Daemon's. Somehow. And so let's continue. Though the Stepstones were engulfed in blood and fire, King Viserys and his court remained unperturbed. "Let Daemon play at war," his grace is reported to have said. "It keeps him out of trouble." Viserys was a man of peace, and during these years King's Landing was an endless round of feasts, balls, and tourneys, where mummers and singers heralded the birth of each new Targaryen princeling. Queen Alicent had soon proved to be as fertile as she was pretty. In 107 AC, she bore the king a healthy son, naming him Aegon, after the Conqueror. 2 years later, she produced a daughter for the king, Helaena. In 110 AC, she bore him a second son, Aemond, who is said to be half the size of his elder brother, but twice as fierce. And so here we have a little transition away from the Stepstones, which we talked about in the last video, and we go back to court. Again, it's hilariously biased that Viserys is called a man of peace when he is financing the war in the Stepstones and Westerosi are fighting in it. Archmaester Gildain makes it look like this is Daemon's war, when Corlys and Viserys are its main organizers. But moving away from the war in the Stepstones, we get a bit of a jumbled time skip in the story. Let's remember that Rhaenyra is made heir in 105, and Viserys marries Alicent in 106, and then nothing really happens at court for 5 years, save 3 things. First, Alicent has children, namely a male heir. Second, Viserys starts getting harassed about changing his heir, leading to Otto getting dismissed. And third, rumors are put forward about Rhaenyra having extramarital sex. Now again, these are the only events that really happened for 5 years, and when taken together, it's very clear what Alicent and the Greens are doing. She is trying to have her son usurp Rhaenyra. Later we're told this quite directly, but it's rather clear that this is Alicent's goal all along. She chooses the name Aegon after Aegon the Conqueror, who was king over his older sister Visenya, a point, by the way, that Archmaester Gildain brought up earlier. And knowing the motivation of Alicent and Otto, the veracity of rumors against Rhaenyra seems extremely doubtful. Yet Princess Rhaenyra continued to sit at the foot of the Iron Throne when her father held court, and his grace began bringing her to meetings of the Small Council as well. Though many lords and knights sought her favor, the princess had only eyes for Sir Criston Cole, the young champion of the Kingsguard and her constant companion. Sir Criston protects the princess from her enemies, but who protects the princess from Sir Criston? Queen Alicent asked one day at court. The amity between her grace and her stepdaughter had proved short-lived, for both Rhaenyra and Alicent aspired to be the First Lady of the realm, and though the queen had given the king not 1, but 2 male heirs, Viserys had done nothing to change the order of succession. The Princess of Dragonstone remained his acknowledged heir, with half the lords of Westeros sworn to defend her rights. Those who asked, "What of the ruling of the Great Council of 101?" found their words falling on deaf ears. The matter had been decided, so far as King Viserys was concerned. It was not an issue his grace cared to revisit. And so again, we should focus on the fact that only 3 things really happened in these 5 years. Alicent birthing children, the harassment of Viserys to switch his heir leading to Otto's dismissal, and rumors about Rhaenyra having sex. And again, when taken together, it's rather obvious what's going on. Viserys was harassed but proved resistant to changing his heir from Rhaenyra, instead grooming her for rule. He begins bringing her to meetings, showing that he has absolutely no intention of changing his heir. And so, notably, in the middle of this paragraph all about how Viserys is not changing his heir, we weirdly hear rumors against Rhaenyra from Alicent's mouth, insinuating that Rhaenyra is having sex with Criston Cole. Rumors that Gildain himself implies are true by saying that Rhaenyra and Criston were constant companions, and that he always wore her favorite tourneys. Now, Gildain is being ridiculous. He says that Criston and Rhaenyra are constant companions, making it sound like there's affection and impropriety, when being around Rhaenyra is literally his job. He's her sworn shield. Also, Rhaenyra is between the ages of 9 and 14 during this period. This means that there was a tourney for Aegon's birth when she was 10, one for Helaena when she was 12, and one for Aemond when she was 13. Rhaenyra making her sworn shield her champion in a tourney when she's 10, 12, and 13 is being used to imply that she was having sex with him. That's Gildain's level of bias here. Now, we aren't sure exactly when Alicent's comment about Criston and Rhaenyra was made. Its placement in the text makes it sound like it simultaneously happened before Otto left in 109, the next paragraph, but after Aemond was born in 110, the previous paragraph. So, who knows? Whatever the case, the causation is pretty clear. Viserys was resisting switching his heir, and so Alicent began spreading rumors about Rhaenyra's supposed sex life, a girl who was around 12 or 13 at the time. Now, near the end of the paragraph, we hear about some unknown people called Those, asking what of the Great Council. Of course, Gildain uses a faceless group like Those to make it seem like there is a large mass of people bugging Viserys, a supposed mass of people who also didn't care that Daemon was passed over. Who Those were is unknown, though it certainly included Otto and Alicent. The other people in Viserys' orbit include Grand Maester Runketer, who is a maester, so maybe he was bugging Viserys, and then there's the Master of Law, Lionel Strong, who is said to be mostly silent, despite being a Hightower crony. As Viserys replaces Otto with Lionel, it sounds like Lionel wasn't bugging him. Another person possibly around is Larys Strong, a wild card, but again his father Lionel was chosen to replace Otto, so likely not. And then there's Lyman Beesbury, who's a Rhaenyra supporter, and Harold Westerling, who seems to have no political opinion. All in all, it seems like Those was probably just Otto, Alicent, and maybe Runketer. Now what's interesting is that we hear about the feud between Alicent and Rhaenyra beginning here, with their amity being described as short-lived. But of course we should remember that Alicent is between the ages of 18 and 23 during this period, while Rhaenyra is between the ages of 9 and 14. There is a 9-year difference between them. This isn't a child feuding with a child or an adult feuding with an adult. It's an adult feuding with a child. It's an adult spreading rumors about a child having sex and pushing the king to disinherit her. Alicent's behavior is pretty bad, and Archmaester Gildain is doing his best to repair Alicent's image and destroy Rhaenyra's in his writing. Still, questions persisted, not the least from Queen Alicent herself. Loudest amongst her supporters was her father, Sir Otto Hightower, Hand of the King. Pushed too far on the matter, in 109 AC, Viserys stripped Sir Otto of his chain of office and named in his place the taciturn Lord of Harrenhal, Lionel Strong. "The hand will not hector me," his grace proclaimed. And so here we find that in 109, Otto Hightower had pressured the king to switch his heir to such a degree that Viserys was forced to remove him. Now this is a pretty bold move from Viserys, considering that he is described as a pushover. Also, Alicent Hightower is his wife, and Otto served as Hand for 8 years. Otto must have pushed hard to provoke such a strong reaction from the normally tractable king. However, Viserys is not very smart in choosing a replacement, as he picks Lionel Strong. It's worth noting that Lionel is the Lord of Harrenhal, the host of the Council of 101. He studied at the Citadel many years with the Maesters, and Lionel was hand-picked by Otto to be on the small council. Although we hear relatively little from Lionel in his 11 years as Hand, the times we do hear from him, he's in agreement with the Maesters and the Hightowers. Lionel and Otto are almost certainly on the same team, making the change in Hand fairly meaningless. Even after Sir Otto had returned to Oldtown, a Queen's Party still existed at court, a group of powerful lords friendly to Queen Alicent and supportive of the rights of her sons. Against them was pitted the Party of the Princess. King Viserys loved both his wife and daughter, and hated conflict and contention. He strove all his days to keep the peace between his women, and to please both with gifts and gold and honors. So long as he lived and ruled and kept the balance, the feasts and tourneys continued as before, and peace prevailed throughout the realm. Though there were some, sharp-eyed, who observed the dragons of one party snapping and spitting flame at the dragons of the other party whenever they chanced to pass near each other. And next we get a paragraph that's a bit puzzling for a number of reasons. It's framed as occurring after Otto left for Oldtown, that is in the year 109, but before the next paragraph, the 5-year anniversary tourney in 111. And it's about how Alicent and Rhaenyra both had entourages of supporters. Alicent had a group of powerful lords and Rhaenyra had some sort of group. Now I will say this so-called feud is extremely odd as it's between an adult woman and a child, which seems a bit one-sided. It's difficult to imagine Rhaenyra, a 12-year-old girl, wrangling followers together effectively against a 21-year-old woman. That said, 2 decades later, we do get the names of a good number of lords and ladies at court who supported Rhaenyra because they swore an oath to her back when she was made heir. So maybe this group existed, though it's hard to imagine that Rhaenyra was their leader in much capacity. Additionally, if the pro-Rhaenyra group did exist, they didn't actually do anything. While Alicent's band was actively making up rumors against Rhaenyra, Rhaenyra's group had no response. No action was ever taken to depower Alicent or seek revenge against her. At least not for many, many years. It was always Rhaenyra playing defense, weathering actions from the Greens against her. And so I do wonder if a feud even existed, especially at this moment in time, 109 to 111. A feud places blame on both parties, but in truth this seems more like bullying, one party abusing another. Of course, if no real feud existed, it makes Viserys' actions to keep the peace quite odd. He's giving gold and gifts, but to what ends? He certainly didn't stop the Greens' rumor-mongering. Another odd aspect of the paragraph is the claim that the dragons of the Blacks snapped at the dragons of the Greens whenever they chanced to pass each other. Which makes little to no sense. You see, at this point in the story, the Black faction is essentially just Rhaenyra and supposedly some nameless people who side with her. And Rhaenyra has one dragon, Syrax. Rhaenyra's dragons cannot be said to be plural in any respect until she marries Laenor in 114 and adds Sea Smoke, and then has her sons and their dragons hatch to add Vermax, Arax, and Tyraxes. And with the Greens, Aegon has the very young Sunfire, but again, the dragons aren't plural until at least Daeron is born in 114 and bonds with the dragon hatchling Tessarion, and Helena claims Dreamfire sometime after that, which would not be earlier than, say, 116, assuming she claimed the dragon at age 7. Only Rhaenyra moves to Dragonstone in 115, so the black dragons and the green dragons in a plural sense never lived in the same place. There really wasn't much opportunity for these dragons to spit fire at each other. But again, even if we assume this happened during some sort of family visit, it would have been many, many years after this paragraph is supposed to have taken place. It's either a goof or Gildain is once again being biased. The snapping dragon story makes it sound like there was some sort of initial mutual dislike between Rhaenyra and Alicent dating back early, and things slowly escalated. But that just didn't happen. Even if we believe that these dragons disliked each other, it happened much later, notably after major events like Rhaenyra being accused of sex lessons with Daemon, Joffrey Lonmouth being killed, and rumors of Rhaenyra's children being bastards going around. At a later point in the story, there are legitimate reasons for the Blacks to not like the Greens, as the Greens have wronged them. What seems to be going on here is that Gildain is attempting to shift causation for the Dance of the Dragons. Rather than it being an active plan for the Greens to usurp Rhaenyra, it's instead framed as a building feud, the result of tits and tats that grew and grew. But when we actually look at the events that occurred, it's quite difficult to lay blame equally on both sides. In fact, at this point in the story, there's not a single piece of evidence that Rhaenyra even dislikes Alicent. While Alicent and her father tried to get Viserys to switch his heir and spread rumors about Rhaenyra having sex, Rhaenyra did absolutely nothing against Alicent. We just have a snapping dragon story, which clearly didn't happen. In 111 AC, a great tourney was held at King's Landing on the 5th anniversary of the king's marriage to Queen Alicent. At the opening feast, the queen wore a green gown, whilst the princess dressed dramatically in Targaryen red and black. Note was taken, and thereafter it became the custom to refer to greens and blacks when talking of the queen's party and the party of the princess respectively. In the tourney itself, the blacks had much the better of it, when Sir Criston Cole, wearing Princess Rhaenyra's favour, unhorsed all of the queen's champions, including 2 of her cousins and her youngest brother, Sir Gawain Hightower. And so next we get the infamous dinner and tourney where the names greens and blacks come from. And while this picture here has become quite iconic, perhaps even being recreated here, I'd like to point out how vacuous this paragraph is in trying to show hatred between Alicent and Rhaenyra. The dinner is astoundingly uneventful. Rhaenyra supposedly dressed dramatically in red and black, dramatically in her house colors, while Alicent wore green. Oh, the burning hatred. What a feud. The women wore dresses. We, by the way, have no evidence that either dress was inappropriate or represented a statement of any kind. No one feels hurt, no one gets angry. The dinner is a complete and utter absence of notable events. And then in the tourney, Sir Criston Cole, a famously excellent tourney knight who always wears Rhaenyra's favor, unhorsed Alicent's champions. And that's it. The scandal. And so I don't really see how any of this displays hatred or rivalry. 2 women wore different colored dresses, and a knight wearing one woman's favor defeated another woman's relatives in a tourney. So what? It's almost outrageous that Gildain is trying to read into this. By comparison, in a tourney at Lannisport, Jorah Mormont wore the favor of Lynesse Hightower, defeating members of the Kingsguard and Jaime Lannister. Would anyone look back at that tourney as some sort of signal of Hightower and Lannister rivalry and hatred? Of course not. It was a tourney. No one was hurt, no one played dirty, one person just happened to beat another person. Incidentally, regarding the greens and the blacks in this uneventful dinner and tourney, there actually isn't too much evidence that the terms blacks and greens were ever used by the characters at the time, or that the terms actually came from this dinner. Keep in mind, the dinner was remarkably uneventful, and Rhaenyra's dress is black and red. So calling her faction black based on this dress is a bit odd. Why didn't they choose red? Why didn't they choose the color of her dress at a more memorable event? By the way, the term green is actually never spoken from any character's mouth to refer to Alicent and Aegon's followers. Black is used a couple times during the Dance of the Dragons to refer to Rhaenyra's allies. However, this may simply be because black is a color with negative connotations, and they are seen as traitors or people with black hearts. Yet there is one who wore neither green nor black, but rather gold and silver. Prince Daemon had at last returned to court. Wearing a crown and styling himself King of the Narrow Sea, he appeared unannounced in the skies above King's Landing on his dragon, circling thrice above the tourney grounds. But when he at last came to earth, he knelt before his brother and offered up his crown as a token of his love and fealty. Viserys returned the crown and kissed Daemon on both cheeks, welcoming him home, and the lords and commons sent up a thunderous cheer as the sons of the Spring Prince were reconciled. Amongst those cheering loudest was Princess Rhaenyra, who was thrilled at the return of her favorite uncle and begged him to stay a while. And so in a huge surprise, Daemon returns during the tourney, flying in on his dragon unannounced to a cheering crowd. He then offers Viserys his crown as King of the Narrow Sea, though Viserys gives it back and welcomes him home. Now the scene is a bit of a parallel to Torrhen Stark, the king who knelt, and gave up his crown to Aegon the Conqueror. Of course, there is a bit of irony here, in that Daemon, the dragon rider, and the one doing the conquering, is the one kneeling to Viserys, who has no dragon. And of course, Viserys refuses the kingdom of the Stepstones while Aegon the Conqueror accepted the North. Now, it's difficult to discern what exactly Daemon's motives are for returning. What we know is that the Stepstones have fallen back into war against the Three Sisters, and now Dorne. Perhaps Daemon is actually sick of fighting and being king, or perhaps he's looking for even more support from Viserys by asking Westeros to annex his kingdom. However, looking at the political situation, it seems unlikely that Viserys would accept the crown and the annexation. Viserys was quite happy financing the war in the Stepstones from afar, without the Seven Kingdoms being officially part of it. It was their policy for 5 years, and claiming the islands would change that policy. It would put the Seven Kingdoms at war with the Three Sisters and Dorne, a land that even Aegon the Conqueror failed to take hold of. Accepting the crown would be too bold of a move for Viserys, and so Daemon's gesture of goodwill looks to be no more than that, a gesture. Viserys was never going to accept the crown, and perhaps Daemon knew this. Daemon simply wanted to reconcile. Now, why Daemon wanted to reconcile, and why now, is a larger question. And we will get into that next time, as this is a good place to stop. We will continue on in part 13 with Daemon's return to court and the big rumor. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.